called Life Steps. Today we're going to be looking at the 8th step in our journey. And there's going to be new here tonight, so don't say that. I believe that each of our steps, each of these steps is something that we need to do all the time in our lives. So it's going to be applicable to absolutely everybody here tonight, myself included. Now we're on a journey together on this little ball of mud and water called Earth. A journey to understand what we've been put here for, where we're coming from, and where we're going. And it's my hope that as we walk together, we can enjoy each other's company and learn from one another along the way. Now, with that being said, can anybody tell me what the 8th step is? Anybody quickly be trying to look it up?
Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became going to make a mess of all.
That was fair enough. Like I said, we hope to enjoy our journey, so there's always the opportunity to earn candy here, so that might anybody tell me the story that we've been looking at and relating to as we've been going through this series. Parable son. You guys should give you half of candy. Well, do you want to visit one? Anyone remember where to find it?
7:30.
Page 730, okay. Anybody remember the scripture reference?
Luke 15.
You ever walk it? So it's Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. Like I said before, by the end of this series, whenever someone says the prodigal son, you'll be able to say Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. Now, can anybody give me a 3-sentence summary, nice, short and sweet, Cole's Note version of the story?
The son took his money. I think it's the oldest son that took his money from his father after his inheritance and left home. And then he squandered it all, while the other one stayed and worked in the fields for his dad. And once he had, the one that took his fortune and squandered it, he realized that he needed to go back home again, but he was embarrassed. But he did go. And his dad was very happy to have him home and had a party for him and treated him like his long lost son, his son had returned.
Oh, right on. Should I be off it or Tootsie Roll?
I'm for Wayne, it's all good. I don't.
Tootsie Roll.
He's got one to rough
That was big. Good work.
So the only other piece there was, his father forgives and restores him. However, the brother refuses to.
You asked him both notes are
So that's the overall story from which we'll be looking into more detail as we go through this step tonight. Now, step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed. That doesn't sound that hard, does it? Get out our paper and pencil and start listing things we've done, hurts we've caused, etc. But wait a minute, didn't we already go through this? What did we do in step 4? When we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. What's so different this time? I thought we dealt with all that stuff and moved past it, but it was all in a rearview mirror. Well, we need to remember that this is a journey that we're on, a journey of restoration. Steps 4 and 5 were about looking at ourselves, our wrongs, and how our actions have harmed others. Step 5 was about achieving some restoration through confession and forgiveness. That part of our journey was focused on our relationship with God, with ourselves, and with the rest of humanity as a whole. about dealing with our sense of separateness and alienation from the world, both physical and spiritual. This step tonight is about building on that work and starting the restoration process with other individuals in our lives. Now, before we go on, I want to stop and encourage us for a second. When we're in this process, this journey, it can begin to seem like a pretty long one. It's a lot of work, and there seems to always be more to do, another step to take. Are we ever going to arrive? Well, the simple answer to that is no, not this side of heaven. But I still want to encourage us to take heart and continue on, because this journey does get easier. Now, if we need to stop and sit on a bench along the way, that's perfectly fine. Life isn't meant to be a sprint. We need to pace ourselves and continue on when we're ready. The most important part of the race is our desire to stay in it. So I encourage each of us to do so. Now, this step tonight, this step 8, is about laying the groundwork for our journey forward, the rest of our lives. Has anyone here ever tackled something big? And I don't mean tackling winning either. Ever build something? Or say, started university? Nothing happens overnight, does it? Building something, you need to plan, to prepare, to lay the foundation, and then build each step as it comes, right? And heading off to school, you have introductory courses your freshman year. You start to focus your studies the second year, and each year afterwards build on the previous one, right? Now, doctors take at least 7 years of schooling and then spend another couple in practical residency. It takes a lot of commitment, doesn't it? But ask yourself, would you want someone operating on you that had just taken Biology 101 last month? Well, this journey we're on is no different. It's going to take some commitment on our part to keep moving forward, to growing and dealing with the stuff that traps us in the past. If it at times seems that we're not making progress, that the journey is a slow one, that's all right. We need to keep our eyes on the goal, placing one foot in front of the other and taking the next step in front of us. Now, last week, as we talked about this, about our needing to be open, to trust, and to be patient, to be open to allowing God to be the architect, not ourselves. Trusting that He is capable and faithful to complete the work in our lives, and patient in our efforts to simply take it one step at a time as He puts things in front of us. We always want to jump to the end, don't we? To know what it's going to look like. Well, there's something I find myself saying over and over to people as I meet with them in counsel, and I often have to take my own advice and remind myself as well of this question. Picture, if you will, an elephant on a really big platter in front of you, all roasted with a giant apple in its mouth. Hopefully we don't upset Peter too much if they see this online. So it's looking like a roast pig, and then someone says to you, you need to eat it. What do? How do you eat a whole elephant? Well, you pick up your fork and your knife, and you begin, one bite at a time. That's how you eat an elephant. And that's how we continue on this journey of life, one step at a time. Not worrying about and perhaps paralyzing ourselves by trying to see the end of the path. So back to this step and the list. Who do we include on this list? Anyone we've harmed in some way. I'll get into more detail in a minute about what we should consider as harm, but we need to include in this list anyone we've harmed in some way. Anyone. I'll say it again. Anyone. Now that might seem a bit daunting, or even frightening when we start to think about it. Anyone? Everyone? Everyone I've hurt in some way? What about if they've harmed me? Do they count then? And the second part of this step talks about amends. What if they don't even know what I've done? Do I need to include those as well? We need to remember that this step is all about making the list, not taking action on the list. So we need to be thorough. Anyone. If we've done something to someone, include it. We'll sort out what to do next. Next. That's not the concern right now. So what do we mean by harm? That can and will be quite varied. Physical harms. Have we actually hit or injured others in some way? Have we stolen from others? Have we not followed through on our financial commitments and left others picking up the pieces? Emotional harms. Have we verbally abused others? Tore down their sense of worth and belonging? Have we removed ourselves from others' lives through our actions and left them feeling cheated or abandoned? Spiritual harms. Have we judged others and caused them to question their faith? Have we led others in our care to not recognize and develop their own spiritual relationships? Now, the list can go on and on. These are just a few examples of what harms can be. Each of us needs to consider our own lives and come up with our own list. As with all things, I encourage us to take on this task first by bathing it in prayer. Ask God to open our eyes to the harms we've caused, both intentional and unintentional. Sometimes we've done things that we didn't even mean to or known that we've done. Ask Him to help us see those connections and to own our parts of it. Now, a word of advice when we undertake this exercise: avoid the extremes. Be as objective as you can, and don't give in to the power of emotion. The whole point of this exercise is so we can compile a list, so we can identify the issues and then look to address them appropriately. The second part of this step, becoming willing, doesn't mean we have to act on each individual case. Our next step will address who and when. We need to be willing in this step to look at each of our actions, to study and to recognize our part and list them down. We're looking to get them out of here so we can objectively look at them and not let them drive us anymore. Doing so allows us the freedom to move in a new direction. You see, loneliness and isolation are often where we live, trapped by our shame and guilt over past actions. This step is the start to addressing that by preparing us to restore relationships with those around us, those we bump into each day. The idea of that can be quite frightening, but again, I encourage us to simply take this one step at a time, trusting that He will lead us forward to the next step when we're ready. Now, earlier in looking at who we should include in our list, the question came up about including those who've harmed us. Now, if we decide to go down that road, justifying our actions based on others' actions and not including them on our list, we're falling for a very deadly trap. We need to own our parts and list them. But perhaps even more importantly, we need to seek to forgive others who have harmed us. But why? Well, for a number of reasons, actually. One being that it helps us to understand more fully what we're going to be asking of others. If we're going to be striving to make amends in the coming steps and asking for forgiveness from others for our actions, how can we not hold out the same offer? Forgiveness needs to be freely offered by us, if we do not want to remain trapped in our pasts. Now I want to point out something here there's often confusion about. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean forgetting and continuing on as if nothing has ever happened. Forgiveness is not about blindly proceeding forward and not utilizing wisdom to guide our actions in the future. Forgiveness is actually about placing the issue, or perhaps a better term would be returning the issue to where it truly belongs, with the perpetrator, not the victim. We cannot change the actions of another person. So why would we want to stay captive to them? Why would we want to carry around that baggage with us? It just gets heavier and heavier. So again, I encourage us to forgive others and pass the bag back to them to deal with. Now with that in mind, I want us to turn to the story of the prodigal son to see what it can speak to us about this 8th step that we're on. There are actually 2 things I think we can learn from it. One demonstrates and points to the benefit of taking this step, while the other highlights the danger of refusing to. I'm also sure there's more things that can be learned as well. I'm not trying to say that I've only found the only 2 nuggets that are in this story. So when you get a chance, read the story again for yourselves and see what jumps out at you. I'll bet you'll be amazed at how it comes to life. Now, if we recall the story earlier, the summary, the prodigal son had demanded his inheritance early and ran off, wasting it in a far-off land. Out of money and starving, in verse 18 we're told that he decides to take some action. In essence, he takes the 8th step in Luke chapter 15, verse 18, when we read, "I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. I have sinned." That's another way of saying, I have harmed, isn't it? And who has he harmed? His Father and God. And how does he know that? Why would he identify both of these parties? Well, he's looked back at his actions and considered how they affected others, hasn't he? He's reviewed, identified, and made a list of his transgressions, hasn't he? And now he plans to head home and make amends. There you have it. Step 8. So what were his sins or harms? While not a comprehensive list, they can serve us as stepping stones to possibly identify our own harms, I believe. He dishonored his father, and I'm sure caused some emotional harm in verse 12 by demanding his inheritance before his father had even passed on. He lusted after his father's belongings rather than cherishing the relationship that was being offered to him. Now, we've never done that before, have we? We've never based how much time we give someone, our willingness to engage in relationship, based on their social or financial status, have we? We've never looked at a car or a bike and failed to even take a second glance at the one who's in control of it, have we? The son, we're told in the story, wasted his money on wild living, the specifics of which his brother alludes to by saying that his brother wasted his inheritance on prostitutes. And we can assume that along with that, such a lifestyle probably included alcohol and partying. We've never engaged in such things, have we? Gotten drunk, smoked some dope. Perhaps not employed a prostitute, but how about engaged in premarital sex? Like I said, the story does not provide us a comprehensive list of what to look for when creating our own lists. But isn't it amazing how something written 2,000 years ago details the cares and concerns of today, just like it was written yesterday. That is the power of the living Word. So this story can not only speak and help us today to identify issues in our own lives, but can also serve to encourage us in our walk along this journey. The son decided to do a step 8, identify his sins, and was willing to try and make amends. His willingness did not guarantee that relationships would be restored. In fact, he thought himself that he was headed home to become a servant. But isn't it also amazing how his willingness is what put him in a place where the possibility of restoration could occur? Unless he'd been willing and taken the step 9, by the way, which we'll be looking at next week for any keeners who want to study up and get ready, earn some candy. Unless he'd been willing, there could have been no different future. So take heart. Take this step, and who knows what the next step will bring. Now the second piece we need to look at in this story is the brother who stayed home. The brother in this story, we remember, refused to forgive. Coming home from work one night, he finds a party taking place, celebrating the return of his brother. And verse 28 tells us that the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. Now, did he have a right to be angry with his brother? Sure. Anger in and of itself is not a sin. Jesus himself, we're told, got angry. Angry at the money changers in the temple for ripping people off and not honoring God. Anger can be righteous. To be righteous means to be in right relationship with God. So we are called to be angry, called to righteous anger when confronted with something that is not in right relationship with God. To be angry with things that don't line up with his desires. So the brother's anger was justified because his brother had harmed him, his father, and God. He had broken their relationships. What we do in our anger is where we get into trouble, though. And that's the case here with the brother. He refuses to forgive, and his refusal traps him into hanging on to the past. His anger leads him into sin when he disrespects his father by refusing to follow his example, never mind ignoring his father's pleading to come in and join the celebration. He begins to look inward and becomes selfish when he points to the fact that the father had given his brother his inheritance early and now throws a party, killing the fattened calf, while he was never given anything. That the faithful brother never received anything for staying home and serving. Now who is coveting in this story? Remember at the very beginning of tonight, I said that each of these steps are something that we need to be engaging in every day of our lives. Well, this is exactly a case in point. The brother had the right to be angry, but when faced with the choice of what to do with his anger, he steps off the path and isn't willing to engage in step 8. If he would have taken the time to quickly assess the situation, recognize his own sin, and been willing to make amends, he wouldn't have missed the boat. Instead, he is trapped, held captive, and driven by his sins. And where do we find those like him? Outside the party. Outside of life as it's been designed and meant to be lived. Living in broken relationships with little hope of anything different in the future. That is the real and present danger of refusal to engage in this journey. So in conclusion tonight, we've said all along this series that this is a journey of restoration. If something needs to be restored, by definition that means it's not all that it was formerly, or can be, right? So I've been encouraging us, and will continue to encourage us all, to have courage and commit to taking the next step as it presents itself. I believe each of these steps are something we need to be doing all the time in our everyday life. And I'm excited at the prospect of our futures. As I said earlier, we're all on a journey together on this little ball of mud and water called Earth. A journey to understand what we've been put here for, where we've come from, and where we're going. It's my hope that as we walk together, we can enjoy each other's company and learn from one another along the way. And next week, as I said, we're going to be looking at step 9. So check out your Bibles. Read the story of the prodigal son and see where you can find him taking that next step. I guarantee you won't be disappointed when you open up and let the Word speak to you. Following this, as normal, we're going to have coffee, snacks, and normally some kind of a fancy cake. So hang around, because this is the most important part of the night, probably. It's just hanging out, spending some time together, building our relationships. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn His face towards you and give you peace. May you keep your rubber side down and your eyes fixed on Him. God bless you, and see you again next week for the next part of the journey.